Dating can be terrifying because, first of all, you're putting yourself out there, you're fearing rejection, you're wondering, are they the one, or are you just wasting time? And then the disappointment ends up piling up and you find yourself asking, am I actually dateable? Now, as the director of relationship behavioral science at Hinge, what on earth are we getting wrong that makes finding love feel so impossible?
So I think in general, dating is hard. Dating is scary. You're basically presenting yourself and saying, this is who I am. Do you like me? Would you want to be with me? And at the same time, you're evaluating the other person. But there's things about dating that have always been hard. And I think one of them is rejection, especially when you're like, this is the time it's going to work out. Finally, I've met my person. And then suddenly, someone's single at 33 and they're like, this is just not where I thought I would be. So there's some dating blind spots that are holding people back. So dating blind spots are these patterns of behavior that hold people back from finding love. But why they're blind spots is that you can't identify them on your own. And that's why when I work with people in a coaching capacity, I often start by saying, before we meet for the first time, I want you to ask your friends and family, why do you think I'm single? And it's vulnerable for people, but that's sort of part of it. It's saying to your friends and family and community, hey, I'm putting myself out there and I really want to learn and grow. And then they will help hold you accountable and they will be there with you on your journey. So sometimes the things that people bring to me are things like, oh, my mom says I'm perfect and I just haven't met the right guy yet. Or, you know, stuff where you're like, okay, you're not perfect. No one's perfect. Let's work on the stuff that can actually change. But a lot of times they bring in really juicy stuff like, I think you're traveling for work so much and I understand that that's important for your job, but what can you do to also prioritize relationships? And I think that one's so big because I feel like work is very seductive, right? And so oftentimes people are like, I'm going to give up on dating or I'm going to take a break from dating because work, it's so easy and it's so gamified. Other things that people tell me when they say, why am I single? I often hear, I'm too picky or I'm not picky enough. I think that's one that's not explored that often, the not picky enough. It's like you might need to raise your standards or as you get older, you need to date a different type of person who's more of a life partner than sort of a fling. And so I took all of these different reasons why people were single and I categorized them into this framework called the 3 dating tendencies. And this is a quiz that people can take online and you can have more than one, but just helpful to be able to explain to yourself and others maybe what your blind spot is. So the first one is called the romanticizer. And this is someone who really has unrealistic expectations of relationships. So for the romanticizer, there's really this feeling of, I'll know it when I see it. There's a soulmate for me. There's one person for everyone, and I just need to find my person. And while that's very sweet, it often causes problems. Because if they meet someone who's great but doesn't match their vision of what their soulmate should look like, they may give up on that person because they'll say, oh, this isn't my soulmate. Or if the relationship hits that inevitable rough spot, which they all do, they'll say, well, if this were my soulmate, we wouldn't fight. So for the romanticizer, it's really about the fact that great relationships require work and that if you're putting in that effort, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, and to worry less about the we met. So if you're going to be with someone for 50 years, the day you meet is 0.0055% of the total relationship. So forget about the we met and focus on meeting.
And when you say we met, as in like the moment that you actually
People love these rom-com stories of I was at the farmer's market and he was at the farmer's market and we both reached for the tomato at the same time and then we bantered over the tomato and now we're married. And it's like, yes, that is adorable. And Renee Zellweger would be great portraying that role in a movie. But guess what? That doesn't really matter. In a long relationship, you can meet on an app. You can meet through work. It doesn't have to be the most romantic story of all time. What's romantic isn't how you met, it's who you met and that you met.
Understood. So the negative side to that is you could be meeting the right person and you don't even realize it because you have such high standards of what that first meeting should look like.
Exactly. The first meeting, or this idea that if you fight, you're saying, oh, my soulmate and I would never fight. We're going to completely see eye to eye. And that's not realistic.
So understanding that and identifying it, how can someone then take that and use that when it comes to dating?
Yeah. So for a romanticizer, I think the big lesson for them is first, the person may come in a different package from what you were expecting. So for example, a client of mine ended up getting married to a divorced dad. And that's not who she thought she would be with. But in the end, he was exactly who made her feel safe and secure, and she really liked him. But it did take us working together in a coaching capacity for her to sort of see beyond who she thought she would end up marrying.
That's so cool. Okay, so that was number one. That's
Yeah.
the romanticizer. You said there's two more.
Yeah, so the second one is a maximizer, and I would have to say I'm seeing more and more of this in our society. So this is the person who has unrealistic expectations of their partner. And then when you get very into comparison, you can be a bit guilty of relation shopping over relation shipping. So relation shopping is when you seek out a partner the way that you would seek out a purchase instead of relation shipping, which is the pursuit of a romantic partner. And so there's a lot more comparison going on. So for the maximizers, they often come to me and they say, okay, well, let me tell you about all my ex-girlfriends, and I want the looks of this girl and the ambition of this girl and the family of this girl and the height of this girl and the weight of this girl. I know what I want. Let's just go find her. And I'm like, this is so the wrong way to approach dating because the person has an arrogance that they think they know exactly what they want. But the truth is, we're often wrong about who's going to make us happiest long term. And if you're seeking this very specific person, you may miss out on all these other great people. And so for the maximizers, it's about not seeking perfection and not saying, well, this girl was 80% of what I want, so that must mean 100% is out there. Let me keep searching. Instead, it's I found someone who shares my values, who wants the same things I do, who makes me happy. Let's build a relationship together. So for the maximizer, it's often about not continuing to search and instead saying, I found someone great, let's really do this.
So in that scenario, let's say, because I assume people have wants and needs and
Yeah.
desires, would you rank order them? Like, okay, this is the thing that is most important to me all the way to the least, because I assume you wouldn't want to just dismiss what people are looking for.
Right. Yeah. So I often work with people on this idea of deal breakers versus pet peeves. So a deal breaker is a fundamental compatibility that would prevent you from being with someone. So let's say for you, you were English and your husband, or, at the time your boyfriend was American, but you both didn't want to move. That might be a fundamental incompatibility. You don't want to live in the same country. Or somebody's a smoker, the other person has asthma. This is a real reason why people may need to end a relationship. But many of the times, the thing that we think is a deal breaker is actually a pet peeve, just something that is annoying to us, but is not a fundamental incompatibility. And I find as people get older, they often move so many things to their deal breaker list. And then they're really pushing a lot of people away or disqualifying them. And so the work that I like to do with people is to say, I'm not telling you to settle. Settle is the S word. It's a bad word. My clients hate when I seem to be implying that they should settle. Instead, it's about saying, I'm going to double down on the things that matter. So that might be, I need honesty because the moment that someone's dishonest, my guard goes up and I can't be in that relationship. That's great. They might double down on the fact that I want kids and I need a partner who wants that. Great. So focus on those and be relentless in them. But a lot of the other things like height or how much money somebody makes or what their family dynamic is, those are the kind of things that you can be flexible on. And it may not be exactly what you would have come up with in your perfect scenario, but you're getting the things that matter to you most.
That's so good. Okay,
Yeah.
and then the third one?
Yeah. So the third one is the hesitator. And so anyone listening knows that they're a hesitator if they're really not dating at all. And so this person has unrealistic expectations of themselves. So it might be a sense of, I am not who I want to be yet. Or I want to lose weight. I want a more impressive job. I want to clean my house first. And there's always this goalpost. I'll be ready to date when, ... But even when you achieve that, the goalpost keeps moving. And so I feel like there's this sense of, I'm not who I want to be yet. So I want to become that before I put myself forward. They have this story in their head. I'm going to go on a date and the guy's going to be amazing and he's my dream guy. But because I'm not who I want to be yet, he'll reject me. So I don't want to meet him yet. No one's ever 100% ready for anything. You need to start before you're ready. And so a lot of it comes down to self-love because there's a story in your head that you are not worthy of love yet and that you need to become worthy. And I want to tell those people, that is something that you can embrace and you can continue to work on self-love and go to therapy, talk to your friends. All of that is amazing, but you can also get better at dating at the same time by putting yourself out there. And so much of our intelligence and our relational intelligence is something that you can only do with another person. And so for the hesitator, their work is really around getting out there and understanding that the only way to get better at dating is by actually dating. It's about these small steps like, all right, I'm going to download Hinge and make a profile by next Sunday. I'm going to go on one date a month, even if it is so hard and I really don't want to go. I'm going to just try to do that in the beginning. I'm going to research 3 cool places to go on a first date. These little small steps make it so much easier for somebody to go from 0, not dating at all, to 1 where they're finally out there and starting to date.
Yeah, that's so good. All right, guys, we'll be right back with Logan Ury. But for one quick second, if this or any other Women of Impact episode has brought you value, if it's impacted your life in any single way, please smash that subscribe button down there, because you have no idea how much that really does become the calling card to all women out there, that this is the place, this is the community that you can be a part of, where we have each other's backs. You can build your confidence without the judgment. So smash that subscribe button. Thanks for listening. Now, back to the episode. And so I'd love to now dive into starting a dating profile with you. And there's different scenarios that I have that I would love to talk you through. So number 1, there's the picture. Let's just be honest. I'm going to look for the best photo. I'm going to take 1,000 pictures. I'm going to ask all of my friends, and I may even have paralysis analysis because I just don't know which photo to post.
Yes. So at Hinge, we've done a ton of research into what makes a successful profile. And we study people that go on great dates, dates that turn into relationships. What are they doing differently? And then we use that information, and we have this team called Hinge Labs that studies it. And we know this is what makes a great profile. So the first thing when it comes to photos is that you should have this really great picture as your first photo, because that's what people are seeing first. And that kind of helps them decide, do I want to see more of you? So first photo should be a clear headshot. It's this idea that it's well lit. I can see exactly what you look like. No filters, no sunglasses. It's truly just like, this is me. Then in your other photos, you should have a combination of a full body picture, you doing something that you love, and then one with friends and family.
All right, so can I push back on the full body picture? Not push back, but I worry some people like, why should I show my whole body? They should like me for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And when I first saw that data, I also felt the same way, where I was like, oh, do I feel uncomfortable saying this? Then I was like, you know what? Like, this is truly what our research found. It's that people are looking to see, what do you look like? And I would rather empower someone to know that and have a profile that's going to be successful for them than pretend that that's not the case. And I think that a huge part of dating is when you show up on a date, you want to look like your profile. Because when I used to use Hinge, I remember I had one profile picture, then I was in a relationship, then I used the picture again, but I was older and I was like, this picture performs well, but this is not what I look like right now. I look older than this. So there had to be that moment where I was like, I am retiring this photo. You have served me well, but I do not want to show up on a date and have a guy be disappointed. So I would say that the pushback of why does there have to be a full body picture is fair, but I really want to give people the information that's going to make them most successful on Hinge, and that's really going to make it so that when you show up on a date, you really know who the other person is and they know who you are too. So I also like to encourage people to write their profiles with hooks in them. So a hook is something that you can grab onto. So if somebody says, my typical Sunday, reading a book in the park. Okay, that's fine, but how am I supposed to respond to that? If you say reading a book in the park, I'm currently reading this, what's your favorite book? Then it's obvious for me, I can respond to the book you're reading and I can answer what I'm reading. So it's almost like you're setting up the conversation for them.
Okay, so what about the vulnerability side of it? Because if I saw somebody's profile and they weren't vulnerable at all, I'd be like, well, I need somebody that is willing to open up and be vulnerable. But other times people just like maybe sharing too much, or is there too much where now it's so overwhelming your vulnerability that now you're actually pushing someone away?
So at Hinge, what we found in our research is that emotional vulnerability is one of the number one things that people are looking for. But oftentimes people feel like they can't be emotionally vulnerable. So oftentimes I work with people and they think there's something about them that makes them undateable. This word comes up all the time. And I feel like this might be something that resonates with the Women of Impact audience, where there's a sense of if they knew this thing about me, then they wouldn't want to be with me. And it's like this big secret, this thing weighting you down, it's on your shoulders. And you're like, I'm not even going to go on a date because I'm going to have to tell them this big scary thing. So that might sound like someone who has a sexually transmitted infection, might sound like someone who's in a lot of debt, someone who had cancer in their 20s, somebody who's chronically ill. And so oftentimes they're not dating at all because they feel like, I don't want to scare somebody off. I don't want to share this big secret. And so I work with people on how do you really tell people that story. And so the first part is owning your narrative. So saying, hey, this thing happened to me. Here's how I'm dealing with it. Here's how it made me a better person. And you're not saying to them, is that okay? Am I good enough for you? And you're not apologizing and saying, hey, I'm so sorry I'm like this. You're just saying, this is a fact about myself, and you share it. And what we know through the research from Brene Brown is that people are very drawn to vulnerability. Vulnerability is what makes us feel safe. Because if I met you today and you presented as perfect hair and perfect body and everything is perfect and polished, I might admire you, but what they actually want is for you to feel human because that will make them feel human and that will make them feel okay. And I have this story that I love where this guy was actually in a sex cult and he spent a lot of money there and he kind of went down the rabbit hole. And at first he didn't tell women about it. But then he found like, this is a real part of my story and I'm going to share it. And if you are okay with it and you hear my narrative, then that'll work. But if you reject me for it, I'd rather know now. And eventually he found a woman who had had a drinking problem in the past. And so she was like, you had baggage. I have baggage, our baggage can match. And it ended up working out for them and they have a great family. And because he was honest about his story, she could be honest about her story. And so I feel like oftentimes people feel like, I need to have a wall up. I need to hold back who I really am because then you'll reject me. And instead, let's work on your story. And also, how can you have the data as to whether this person can handle it or not?
It reminded me of, there was a study, I think it was called something like When the Other Shoe Drops study.
That's a good name.
So it's this whole study where people come in for job interviews and
Yeah.
they're like, no one is perfect. So when you're interviewing for a job or someone comes on stage
Yeah.
to give a big speech, everyone's just waiting for the real human to show. And the longer you wait
Yeah.
to show the flaw,
Yeah.
the more suspicious people get of you.
Wow.
Because they're like, I haven't seen the shoe drop yet, but I know it's going to happen, but now I can't predict it. So the likelihood of you
interesting.
actually getting a job, if you go for a job interview,
Yeah.
if you let the other shoe drop early on, you're more likely to get the job than if you try to be as perfect as possible throughout the whole interview or on stage. And so I love that idea of showing some of your flaws or telling your story up front, because then no one's wondering what that is.
Yes, when I help people with this idea of being, they have this perception that they're undateable, we're often talking about it on a first, second, or third date. So, for example, a woman that I worked with said to me, I'm a single mom. And when I meet men, men assume that I have an ex husband who's my co parent. And she's like, my ex husband actually committed suicide. And she's like, I don't want to talk about that on the first date. And she's like, we weren't together at the time, but of course, this is like the father of my children. And it was a really hard thing for her. So she was like, I'm always ask this question about like our co-parenting schedule because people just assume this mom has an ex-husband who's the dad. And so she said, when do I talk about this? And so I think that for people, depending on the story, they might share information at certain times. So for her, she might just say something like, it's kind of a long story, but I actually have my kids full time. And then say something positive like, it's so great getting to spend time with them. My parents are really involved, or I have a great community, or, tonight they're with their babysitter and it's great that I can be here with you. And so I think people should share things not when they feel pressure to, but when they want to. And maybe you call your friend afterwards crying and you're like, I messed up the date. I said the wrong thing. Okay, maybe you did. Maybe you're being too hard on yourself, but maybe you did. That's fine. You'll go on another date. I think it's this fear of failure. It's this perfectionism that prevents us from trying. And the only way to get better, the only way to achieve our goals is by trying and is by failing. And so for people who are not trying or failing, they are much much farther from achieving their goals than that person going out there and putting their foot in their mouth on a bunch of dates.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so you've set up your profile
Yeah.
and you've done all the
You have
work.
a great
You've got
profile.
a great profile, thanks to you. So now let's say you've swiped and you're like, I kind of like this person. I want to go on a date with them. I've heard you talk about how we always have negative bias. And so we go on a date with preconceived notions, or we bring our past with us, whether, let's say, somebody's broken our heart before. And so we bring all of this to the table. Take me through that first date on what are the things that actually set us back from actually finding someone that's right for us, and things that actually can benefit us.
So a big piece of advice that I have for people is to actually get to the date sooner. So this is a huge mistake I see people making. Like, imagine if you and I match on an app and then I'm like, oh, well, I want to make sure we have a lot to talk about. So let's text for a while. Oh, then I'll tell her about this. And then I'm like, oh, well, at the end of 3 weeks, I'll decide if I want to go out with her or not. But at the end of those 3 weeks, I've formed an image of you in my mind. Then when I meet you, even if you're great, but you're not exactly who I thought you were, I'm disappointed. So at Hinge, we found that the sweet spot is after 3 days of chatting on the app is actually the perfect time to ask the person out on a date. And so that way you're actually in person, or you could be on FaceTime for the date, getting more information from them. So that's one of them, getting to the date sooner so that you're not building a fantasy of them in your head. Another one is on the date, asking questions. You would be surprised by the number of people who tell me that they go on dates with people who are ZQ, zero questions. So this guy said to me, Logan, went on a date with this woman, and at the end of the date, I could have written her biography. I knew everything about her. She couldn't have told you even where I work. So I think at a minimum, just being someone that's a great listener, an active listener, and asking questions, that will get you very far. And there's this idea of be interested, not interesting. Oftentimes, the best conversationalists, the people who we see as most charming, are not the ones who talk the most. It's the ones who ask questions, because most people enjoy speaking about themselves. So when someone gives you a chance to really dig into who you are and explore, you enjoy that conversation. And then you say, oh, they're such a great conversationalist.
So what kind of questions could you ask? Because I fear I would go into like almost like a job interview.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, so where did you go? Oh, where were you born? Oh, what did they do? Have you done this?
So I would say if you can actually start with something that's more interesting to you, something that you want to talk about, that is such a great way to skip the small talk in the beginning. So something that I have advised people to do is think of something that they want advice on. Think of a story that happened to them on the way to the date or at work. And if you can walk in the way that you would walk in to talk to a friend, that can work out well. And why that's so great is because when you go on a date and someone asks you, how many siblings do you have? It's like you have a tape in your head and you're pressing play. I have one sister, she's older than me, da 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 da. But if you talk to me about something that's really going on for you or happening in the world, I don't have a press play button there. I'm going to actually be present with you. And those moments where we're present are really what creates memorable connection.
Coming up, is there a difference between the way a guy sees sex on the first date versus the way a woman sees sex on the first date?
We just did a lot of research on this at Hinge, and
my morning routine is everything to me because it sets my day up to be able to go and freaking crush it. But let's face it, sometimes habits and routines can get a little boring, especially when it comes to food. All I end up eating is eggs and bacon for breakfast until I discovered the amazing chocolate protein powder from Bilyeu Valley. Now, they actually come in different flavors, but I can't believe that I get to eat this for breakfast. I get my 13 grams of protein that I need in the morning, and I also get to have chocolate for breakfast. It sets my day up to be absolutely amazing. I get all the energy. It doesn't have gluten, it doesn't have soy, it doesn't have dairy, it doesn't upset my stomach, but it still has the protein and the flavor that allows me to go and enjoy my day and freaking crush it. And right now, guys, they're actually offering buy one, get one free. So you can just click the link below and get yours right now. Cheers.
That's so cool. Okay, so now going to that negative bias thing. I had a friend that went on a date and I was like, oh, how did it go? She's like, no, right off the bat, I knew they weren't right for me. And I was like, why? What happened? She's like, I sat down and I ordered a Diet Coke and they looked at me and they ordered a Diet Coke too. And I was like, okay. I'm like waiting for the thing.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, he was just literally ordering everything that I was. He was just copying me.
That's funny.
My heart broke because I'm like, maybe the poor guy wanted Diet Coke.
Yeah.
And the same
That's
thing.
not like an obscure drink.
Yes, but I go to, right, from the abstract,
Yeah.
it not being me seems strange. But in her own mental model, that made complete sense to her. So we all come to these dates, we all come to these scenarios with preconceived notions of if they do this, it means this. How do we get out of those preconceived notions and just take that person for who they are in front of us instead of linking them to maybe an ex-boyfriend that treated us badly?
So there's this common thing now called the ick. And have you heard of it?
Yes.
Okay, so this feels to me like an ick. Like her ick might be when they order what you order. Her ick is a guy drinking Diet Coke, whatever it is in that story. And so if I were working with her, I would say, what are your goals? And I would really get clear with her on what she wants, because I think that when people lose sight of why they're dating and what they're looking for and how they want to wake up on a Sunday morning and walk to a coffee shop holding hands with someone, then they get caught up in things like he ordered a Diet Coke after I ordered it. So it would help her really realign on why she's dating at all. And it might be that she's burned out and she needs a break, and that's why this is happening. And then I would say, great, take a break, because the way you're dating right now is not going to get you the results you want. Then I would talk to her about, why is this happening? Is this something from when you were younger where you felt like you had siblings and you couldn't have your own identity? And I might try to explore that. Or I would say, I think that this is just a pet peeve of yours that you've turned into a deal breaker, and you're using this as a chance to put a wall up. So I often find as people get older, I was on this Netflix show, The Later Daters, and people are over 55. This came up a lot. It's like the older you get, the more you're like, been there, done that. I don't want to deal with that. But it's actually very important to take those walls down. And so I would try to understand, are you afraid to be in love? Are you afraid of being vulnerable? Are you afraid of connection? And was this a convenient reason to reject someone?
I know her very well.
Yeah.
I think I can safely say yes. It is a way of her finding a reason to reject. Okay, so let's say you're on this date and you have tremendous chemistry, like really great chemistry. So talk to me about chemistry, and if you feel like it must be a must on a first date,
Yeah.
and at what point is it beneficial or detrimental to your relationship?
So this is something that's kind of become a pet topic of mine, this idea that people are very obsessed with that spark, almost like an overconfidence, like, oh, I know within 5 seconds if we're going to be a match. When I think that that's misinformed. And I really feel like the spark has become my nemesis, because people are really missing out on great potential partners because they're worrying way too much about that initial chemistry, that initial spark of the butterflies and the rainbows and the puppies and all of that. So going back to your questions, the first myth of the spark is that if you meet your soulmate, if you meet the right person, then you're going to feel love at first sight. And that's just not true. Many couples got to know each other over time, or you might initially not be sure about somebody, but by the end of the date, when you realize how much you have in common, you're really falling for them. And so we know from research that only 11% of couples say they had love at first sight. So the spark is really something that can grow. So the second myth is that if you feel the spark, then of course it's a good thing. And so let me just say it. Chemistry is real. The spark is real. I have absolutely, before I met my husband, in the 10 years that I've been with my husband, felt the spark with people. Sometimes you just meet someone and there's certain energy there and it's great. And we enjoy the spark. But it doesn't always mean that there's something going on between you and that person. It might be that they are very sparky. Like if we think of a handsome celebrity, probably a lot of people that meet George Clooney think, ooh, I have the spark with George Clooney. It's like, no, he's just sparky. And so I think that's oftentimes something that people need to understand is it may not be something between you and that person. It may be that they're very sparky. And it might be the case that what you're feeling and interpreting as chemistry is actually anxiety. And it's actually alarm bells in your head saying, does he like me? Does he not like me? He's being hot. He's being cold. And sometimes that feeling of not knowing can feel very exciting, and we get addicted to that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not actually the secure feeling that we should have with a long-term partner. And then the third myth of the spark is that if you have it, then the relationship's going to last a long time and it's viable. And that's just not true. A lot of couples meet the right way. They meet with this romantic story, but it's not enough to keep them in the relationship. And so don't stay in the wrong relationship because you met the quote unquote right way.
Okay, so still on the first date, I've heard you talk about the end of a date and how like you want it just to end well.
Yeah.
I went to film school, and one of the things they teach you is no matter what you do when you're directing a
Yeah.
movie, don't mess up the ending.
Yeah.
Like you can mess up the whole movie, but the ending is what people remember. So when I heard you say that about the day, how do you start to think about that? Because I'm actually going to go back to a date that one of a male friend of mine told me. They were like, we would get along so well. The date was great. And then right at the end, she said something really freaking weird, and now I don't want to ever date her again. So
I wonder what she said.
it was something about, he was like, do you want me to give you a ride home? Because he's a real gentleman. So he was like, I don't want her to get an Uber by herself. And she was like, well, that's a bit forward. And so then he was like, no, I just want to make sure that you get home okay. And she was like, well, you can't kiss me. It was something like very aggressive.
Yeah.
And that's when he was like, it was so strange. He was just trying to be sweet and kind.
Yeah, interesting.
And every connection they had throughout the entire date was completely gone in that one moment.
Yeah. So there's great research that shows that we disproportionately remember things based on the peak top moment and the ending. So for a movie, it might be the climax and then it's the ending. And so for a date, how can you end in this great way? Whether it's giving somebody a meaningful compliment, it's ordering that dessert and being a little bit naughty or whatever that feels like to you, or even having a second location. So that's kind of a common thing that people do on first dates is, oh, I'm trying to gauge if this person likes me. I'll suggest that we go to another bar or we go for a walk. And if they say yes, that's kind of a sign that they're interested or they want to keep getting to know you. So that might be as simple as getting in the practice of doing those things, or when you're making a plan for a date, thinking, what is a possible second plan I can do to extend if the date goes well?
Okay, that's really good. So let's talk about sex on the first date then. Is there a difference between the way a guy sees sex on the first date versus the way a woman sees sex on the first date?
We just did a lot of research on this at Hinge, and there was some variation in that, but a lot of people seemed aligned on maybe the second date and beyond. So I'm not an expert in some of the sex research, but it is interesting when people ask me, when should I have sex? I would say, I don't really believe in these rules because I think a lot of this stuff can be dependent on other things. Like maybe you've known this person for a long time, but you just started dating. And so I think people should really be tuning into, why am I doing this? And is this something I want to do? And am I expressing myself? Or is this something where I feel like I'm trying to meet someone else's expectations?
Because I don't know if I'm just old school, but I remember back when I was dating in my 20s, early 20s, it was the rumor amongst us girls were like, all right, if you sleep with the guy on the first date, he will never date you again. So as a girl, do not sleep with him on the first date, because even if he says he desperately wants to sleep with you and, oh my God, you're amazing and I can't wait for the second date, it's all a lie. And so as a girl, I remember me and my girlfriend, as a first date rule, we wouldn't shave our legs. So it was like the ultimate, like, even if you're feeling the chemistry and you really want to, like, it kind of makes sure that you don't sleep with the guy on the first date. And you have something called the post-date 8, which are 8 questions that you ask yourself to decide whether you should go on a second date or not. Because a lot of people, once they go on the first date, I'm just going to speak for my friend groups that have told me, they're just like, I don't want to waste more time. I went on the first date. There wasn't the chemistry. It wasn't the fireworks. So I'm just not going to bother. Talk to me about how to assess whether we should be going on the second date and how we just somewhat blanket dismiss people when it could have been somebody that actually is right for us.
Yeah, this is kind of related to what you were saying before. Like, will you suddenly feel the spark at one point? So when I work with people in coaching, they might say, well, the first date was okay. Should I go on a second date? So my philosophy is, if you felt zero connection on the first date and you really don't want to see them again, I'm not going to force you to go on a second date. I'd rather that you go on a first date with someone else. I don't think you can go from zero connection to being super interested in someone. But it's more those in-betweens where you're like, I'm not sure how I feel about them. I could take it or leave it. That I think the post-date 8 can be really helpful. So these are 8 questions that you ask yourself after a date. And what they do is they really help you tune in to how you felt during the date. So they really train you to pay attention to things like, did I feel heard? Did I feel appreciated? Did I feel energized or de-energized? How did I feel in my body? And perhaps the most important one, what side of me did they bring out? And then at the end of each date on your way home, just go through the questions and start answering them, or you can even keep them in a little journal. And what it can help you do is you can help you see, oh, on date 1, I felt okay about them. Date 2, I like them even more. Oh, I'm trending upwards. I like them more and more each time. I'm going to keep seeing them. Or no, my interest in them never developed. I'm not going to see them for the 3rd or 4th date. So it's a really great way of taking your brain out of that mindset of, are they good enough for me? What's their job? How much do they make? Kind of evaluating them like a job interview, and much more mindful and tuning in to, when I was with them, I felt happy. When I was with them, my body felt relaxed. I want more of that. I'm going to see them again.
That's cool. How do you think through when someone goes on a date and they go their separate ways? Sometimes the feedback and the story of that first date are polar opposites. So I actually have a Reddit story that I'd like to read you
Oh,
as an
great. I
example
can't
of
wait.
this. So this is an example of how you can go on a date and you think one of them thinks it's amazing and the other one thinks it's a disaster. So help us navigate this.
Great. Where is this from?
All right, this is from Reddit.
Cool.
My bad date experience was when we agreed to go for a hike, but he got winded within 10 minutes, so we sat down on the bench talking. By talking, I mean he spoke the entire time and I just listened because he wouldn't let me say a single sentence without interrupting me. He then had the audacity to say, "Wow, this is the best date ever. I've never had a better conversation on a first date." Again, this was one-sided and not a conversation, as a conversation involves both parties sharing. To make things worse, he told me about the time that he crapped his pants in public and only told me this because he already felt so close to me to tell me this. He asked for feedback when I said I didn't want to see him again. I told him to save the crapping his pants story for date 50, if even then. He said he didn't want to be with someone who wouldn't accept him for the way he is anyway.
That's hilarious. That's a great one. I love Reddit. That one's super interesting. I feel like it relates back to some of the other stuff that we talked about. So, for example, the interesting one, he felt like they were having a great conversation because he was getting a lot of opportunities to talk and share, and that felt good for him. And that's why it seemed like a great date. From her perspective, he was ZQ. He wasn't asking questions or he wasn't engaging with her. So that didn't feel like a good date. And so not only was it not an equal conversation, but then, of course, this person shared something that maybe didn't show them in the best light. And I actually think it's really cool that the person who wrote that shared the negative feedback, because oftentimes we just don't get feedback. So that guy might go on a lot of different dates and do that and not understand that that's not appropriate first date behavior. And so I understand from his perspective, he's like, you're being too judgmental. I want to be with someone who accepts me for who I am. But I think going back to the beginning of our conversation, dating is a skill and you want to be strategic. And I don't think that it's strategic of him to share that story on the first date because it's not going to get him the results that he wants. So I'm not telling him, oh, censor yourself, be someone you're not. I'm just saying, share that story when it's appropriate, which, as she said, was date 50 or never.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's flip it a little. Let's say that the woman left feeling like, oh my God, that was a great date. Like he said he was going to call me. He gave me a kiss at the end of the night, but he wasn't too much.
Yeah.
He said he's had the best time. And then he literally goes to you. So in that moment, she feels like she's found someone that she's connecting with. She's built this story. She's painted this picture. And then he just disappears. So to your point, it was nice that she actually gave him feedback.
Really nice.
Because then at least he knows.
Right.
But there's a lot of people out there that won't give the feedback and it's actually easier for them to ghost. How in that moment as a woman, do not make it about yourself. Do not allow it to impact your validation and your self-worth.
So in every human interaction, not just in dating, there's my side, your side, and the truth. And I think we just have to acknowledge that we're just experiencing it from our perspective. So in the hypothetical you gave, that person had a really great date and they were interested in seeing the person again. And the other person didn't feel the same way. But we don't know what happened. Maybe they met someone a few days before and feel really serious about them and want to give it a try. Maybe you said something that you didn't realize was offensive, but didn't sit well with them. And so I think, of course, there's that moment of, how did I get this wrong? I thought we had a connection, but I would focus more on, if you don't choose me, then I'm not the right person for you. And I'm going to look for someone who's choosing me when I choose them. So in my dating class, when there's a hesitator speaking to me, she might say, but if I go on a first date, I'm going to be so bad at it. I'm not good at dating. And then I'll say, okay, tell me about a time that you got better at something. And she'll say, oh, I picked up the guitar in my 20s. My late 20s, I got better over time. And I said, how were you in the beginning? And she said, I sucked. So I said, okay, why don't you just say I'm going to suck at the beginning of dating? And why don't you just understand that it's going to be hard and you'll get better? Don't expect to be great in the beginning. So I think part of this could be just understanding that you will get better over time. I think another thing is feeling like you have a lot to offer. So we so often think about, who do I want to be with and what qualities do they want to have? Well, what qualities do you have? And how can you be a person that gets chosen? Are you reliable? Do you show up when you say you will? Do you cancel dates? Are you honest? Do you communicate your feelings? And so I think another way that people can be better at dating is by actually becoming the kind of person that gets chosen, which is someone with the growth mindset, someone who's creative, somebody who puts effort in.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I'm always thinking about, where it takes so much courage to put yourself out there. And when you do, and you've built your self-esteem and you then get rejected like that, I think that that can be a dent to female confidence. And once you then have to reestablish, oh my God, is it me? And that you worry, and then now you don't put yourself out there anymore. And I just know a lot of people, and you mentioned it earlier, where it's like almost like serial dating, where it's like they
Totally.
go ham. They're like, all right, I've signed up for 3 apps and I'm
Right.
going in.
Right.
And then literally I speak to them next time. They're like, I'm not doing the dating apps.
Totally.
I've deleted them all, because they've just given up and they've burnt out. But I do think a big part of it may be just in order to protect your own self-esteem. If you've been rejected time and time again, you're just like, I actually prefer to not get rejected and be single than to put myself out there and then keep getting rejected and then have that as a dent to my ego.
Yeah. If you are dating in a place where you go into a date thinking it'll never work, it hasn't worked the last 12 times, it's not going to work this time, it's unlikely that that mindset is going to help lead to connection. So I say this to clients all the time. Take a break, take a 3-week break, set a timer, put it on your calendar and go have fun and do things that you want to do during that time. Invest in yourself, invest in your friendships, but then get back on the horse. And so I think dating doesn't have to be something where you're always going at it so hard. But I do get worried when people have an identity of I'm not dating, because to me, it's kind of sending a message to the world that you're not open to connection.
Okay, one more that again, I just went to my girlfriends. I was like, guys, you guys are single. What are the things you're struggling with? I've got Logan Ury on. Like, I'm going to ask all the
Oh,
questions.
thanks.
And one of the things really was that they want to look for someone serious. They're in their late 40s, early 50s. And they're like, I'm at the stage, I'm looking for a serious relationship. I'm not looking just for a hookup. So I put that on my profile so people know. And then once you go on the date, you just realize halfway through the day, oh, the guy's still just looking for a hookup. How do you then navigate how much you lean into telling the person that you're looking for a serious relationship, you're not just looking for a hookup? And what are the things that we can do so that we start to weed out the people that, I don't want to say like a waste of time, but let's just admit it, it's a bit of a waste of your time.
Yeah. So at Hinge, we have a feature called Dating Intentions where you can say specifically what you're looking for, from a life partner to something less serious. And there's a space where you can add more about that. So, for example, you can say something like life partner or long term relationship, which might be, come across very serious, which it is, but then make it sillier, like, I want to change my emergency contact from my mom. I think it's a
That's a
chance
good
to
one.
kind of show off your personality. And we've done interesting research on this at Hinge, answering that question of, is it better to say what I'm looking for in the profile from the beginning with fear of turning off some people? Or is it better to not say it and be more vague and explain it later? And what we found is that if you put on your profile that you are looking for something serious, then someone who is also looking for something serious is more likely to reach out to you. But perhaps even better, someone who's not looking for something serious is less likely to reach out to you. So what you're doing is you're really helping attract the right people, the people who are looking for what you're looking, and you're actually turning off the wrong people, the people who do not have the same goals as you.
Yeah, my instinct is to almost lean into all of that. Like, all right, I'm looking for marriage. I want 3 children. And while I respect anyone that doesn't want the same thing, please do not, swipe me if you're not interested in these
I wouldn't
things.
recommend saying that.
Okay.
That's too much. First of all, I always encourage people to share what you do want, not what you don't. I think it just gives a negative vibe when it's like, if this, don't even message me. That's
Ah.
just kind of seeming very negative. Instead, why don't you tell us what you want? Like, if you love vegan food, if you love old movies, like we might be a match, something like that. So I think sharing that you're looking for a long-term relationship is great. And on Hinge, we have features for that. We have dating intentions. We have, do you have kids? Do you want kids? Do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you do drugs? All those things. And you can just state it there and you're giving somebody an impression of who you are. But I also think that going back to our themes of a time and a place and intimacy is earned, I wouldn't come across as so intense on your profile that some people might feel like, oh, she's just like interviewing somebody for role of a spouse. And, that could give the wrong impression.
Thank you. I don't think I'd be very good at dating because I
Okay,
would
well,
like, I haven't got time for this. It's like, you got to be aligned with me or not. But
yeah.
I hear what you're saying. And look, ultimately, just to share with you, actually, if you had asked me before I met my husband a list of all the things, like if I had signed up for a dating app, the app wouldn't have matched me and my husband. It wouldn't have, because he isn't Greek Orthodox. He didn't really know if he wanted to get married or really care about kids. Like, we were very different. But when we met, our values were the same. Our morals were the same. Our intrigue was the same. Our hobbies aligned in the creative. So I'm kind of saying this like as a very married woman now, but I always wonder about these things only because my friend had said, I've gone on these dates and every time I go, I'm looking for something serious. And by the end of the day, I've realized the guy's just looking for a hookup.
And that's why we go back to this idea of dating like a scientist, because perhaps, you were dating him before the age of dating apps, but you might have said, oh, I'm not going to give this person a try because he's not my type. But instead you did give him a type and it ended up working out great. And so that's why I really encourage everyone, you may have a type. It hasn't worked out yet. Why don't you expand what you're looking for?
Okay. Okay. So now we've done the app. We've put up a profile, we've gone on that first date, and now it comes to the moment where we've assessed, do we go on a second date or not? So let's say now you're dating. I think a big thing that my audience struggle with is this the right person?
Yeah.
And you mentioned it right at the beginning when you coach, people say that they hate it when you're saying to settle, right? The S word. That is a really big thing with my audience of knowing, like, is this the right person now to settle, or is there someone better out there? Talk to me about settling, and you have a list of questions you can actually ask to figure out whether they are the right person for the long haul or they're just the right person now.
Right. So first of all this stuff is hard. And I think on the first date, people often make it harder for themselves by thinking on the first date, do I want to marry this person? No. Point of a first date is to have an experience and say, do I want to see them again? But let's say you've gone down the road and you've gone through the milestones. So you've defined if you're exclusive or not. You may have moved in together. You may have talked about if you want kids or not, or what your long-term plans are. And then you're deciding, like, is this the person that I commit to or not? So sometimes people reject someone because they're not perfect. And of course, we all know that there's no such thing as perfect. So instead think, everyone has a set of problems. Is this a set of problems that I can deal with? So for example, I like to be on time or early. And if I'm late, it really stresses me out. My husband, I would say, let's say we have to leave the house at 9 a.m. 9:10 feels the same exact time to him as 9 o'clock. And like, it drives me crazy. And it's not my preference, but like at the end of the day, I have ways around it and it's worth it to me. So it's not like I'm saying, oh, I'm not going to be with someone who's late, clearly, or I'm going to change him. I'm saying I can accept being married to a person who's late and I will use different tools in my life to overcome it. And so I think for someone who's deciding, it's often, do we get married or do we break up? And I have a lot of those calls with people. It's just, is this the person you want to spend a Tuesday night at home with? Is this the person that you can navigate hard moments with? If your parents got sick, if you had a child with disabilities, if one of you had to move for a job, do you trust their instincts? Do you trust their advice? Do you want to co-found a life with them? Is this the person that I want to align myself with for the long term? And do I trust them? Do they have kindness, emotional stability? Can we make hard decisions together? Do they have a growth mindset? And really, what side of me do they bring out? Because that's who I'm going to be in the relationship long term.
I love those hard questions, by the way. I really love them because it really does paint the reality of a relationship. And me and my husband, when we took our vows, we were very young. I was 22 years old. And, you know, the vows are till death do us part through sickness and health. And it feels very like, it's just so romantic. You're standing there, you're in the dress and you're saying sickness and in health, like
Right.
all of that. And then the reality of life actually happened. And for me, 10 years ago, my health was so bad. I could barely stand up for
Wow.
more than 5 minutes at a time because I had such bad dysbiosis in my gut and I could barely eat anything. So I was so malnutrition that I was slowly dying. And my husband stood by me
I love that.
every step of the way. And when it comes to those moments of do you know if they're going to be there through the hardship? Because I think in those moments is when the relationship really gets tested. And so in your question that you just said, and you have them written down in your book, that idea of asking yourself like something that hard of is it someone that can stand by you and you can stand by them
Yeah.
in moments where you are to your knees?
Right.
And if the answer is yes, and that's someone
Yeah.
who
Is this the person you want by your side in those hard moments?
yeah. So, okay, so once you've made that decision, a lot of people fear that maybe they're too old to start over. So, how do you think about dating older? Are there any different rules? And if someone's listening right now where they feel like they're just too old, what do you have to say to them?
Yeah, so it was so exciting to do this opportunity with Netflix. So the show's called The Later Daters, and it's people who are 55 plus finding love for the second or third time. And it's really this additional shot at love. And so it was great working with them because previously I've mostly worked with Gen Z and millennial daters. It was a chance to see a lot of the work that I've talked about with you today applies to older daters as well. And so through the show, you know, people did find love. And I feel like there's no time that you're too old to find love. Love is really about saying, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to look for connection. I'm going to invest in another person. And you're never too old for that.
Oh, I love that. My mum just got married. She's 74 years old and she just married the love of her life and finally said to herself, I just want to be with the person that I love forever.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. But she was the type of person that always kept saying, I'm just too old. I'm too
Yeah.
old to lose weight. I'm too old to
Wow.
find love. I'm too old to admit that I'm in love with a woman now and not a man, like all of that. And so seeing how beautiful it has impacted her, I'm so glad that you're doing that work
Thank
because
you.
that's amazing. I don't want anyone to feel like it's too late for them. All right, Logan, my homie, thank you so much for being here. Where can
Yay.
people find you and all the amazing work you're doing?
Yeah, so people can follow me on Instagram at Logan Ury, and I send out a weekly newsletter. People can find it on my website, and they can take my quiz at loganury.com/quiz.
That's amazing. Guys, I really do dive into the community and figure out what are the things that you guys are struggling with? What are the things that us women are struggling with? And dating just kept coming up over and over again. And it could be the one thing that really does dent our confidence. But Logan was here today to give us all the tips and tactics that we can start to use in our lives so that we never feel like we are waiting. You can take the freaking reins of your life. So guys, go check out her book. And if you're not subscribed, smash that subscribe button down there. And until next time, be the hero of your own life. Peace. If you want to figure out if you're truly compatible or if it's just chemistry, then click here right now. Why is it so damn hard for us women to find healthy, long-lasting love?
I think one of the biggest reasons forever and always will be